Melvin Conway's law is now 60 years old. Engineers love it. It makes them feel a bit clever. If you want to change your software architecture, change your organisation. But as Sam Newman and I discussed today, in real life, that is not usually what happens. And in fact, when people try to apply the Inverse Conway Maneuver directly, you will discover that, just like with the Spotify model, SAFe, and even with Team Topologies, business theatrics take over. So join us today and listen and find out about why the Inverse Conway Maneuver doesn't actually work in real life. Find out the levers you actually have to pull if you want to change your software architecture. And finally, listen in as Sam explains what all architects should be doing right now. Enjoy. Righto, Sam, you've done more than anybody, according to generative AI, Claude, ChatGPT, the lot, to make Conway's law popular and apparently actionable. Why do you think Conway's law resonates so deeply with engineers specifically?
Because it's got the word law in it. So we like the idea of having some fundamental truths in computing, right? And there are some fundamental truths in computing, like we can talk about the mathematical basis for programming and all of that. But the vast majority of developers know nothing about any of that stuff. I mean, I spent 3 semesters doing formal specification and lambda calculus, and I don't remember any of that. So when something comes along that we can just say, oh, it's a universal truth, I think people like that idea. I also think it's one of those things where when you kind of give people the overall pitch, they start seeing it. Like it's a thing you can kind of see. I mean, it's not something I don't liken it as something you action. I sort of more think of Conway's law as being like it's a statement of reality, like, you know, shit rolls downhill, for example. Right?
Is it a law? Is it immutable? That's my first question, my first follow-up. And my second follow-up is, do engineers like it because it makes them feel clever?
I think first question, is it immutable? Absolutely not. I think and I think actually what's interesting, so to explain the kind of, to summarize the original observation that Melvin made back in 1968, there or thereabouts, you know, it's that organizations which create software end up creating software that follows their organizational structure. So you'll see the organizational structure play out in the design and architecture of the system you end up building. It's not immutable. But what does sort of end up happening is if you see a mismatch between those two things, you get a really interesting impediments mismatch. So, you know, if you have, for example, like 3 different teams in 3 different locations, they'll often end up wanting to build 3 different components that they can own, right? And there's a lot of reasons why that makes sense. When you start having all of those 3 teams all trying to work on one single unit, you start seeing almost the conflicts arise out of that. So when I see an impediments mismatch between the organizational structure and the system they're trying to build, you'll start seeing all these kind of friction points. And when that becomes interesting, is really, when it becomes really important, is like, it does also mean if you want to change the architecture without changing the organizational structure or vice versa, you might create some of those impediments and you may not kind of get what you want out of it. So it's not immutable.
No, exactly. It doesn't make it much of a law then, does it?
No,
it's more of a guideline, is it?
It's not, you know, I think is gravity a law? You know, I mean, you can't really fight. I mean, I suppose gravity is a law, isn't it? It's not a law.
It's a heuristic.
It's a heuristic. It's a truism. I think maybe we call it a truism. There we go. And I think, but it's called Conway's law. That's, you know, I don't know who calls it a law. I don't think it wasn't Melvin that said that. So.
At the height of industrial espionage in the world of personal computers, one company broke into another company's offices. This was in the 1980s, nicked the new computer, and when they got it back to their office and opened it up, they realised they needn't bother, because not only was the motherboard an exact replica of the organisational chart, but the motherboard reflected the layout of the research department as well. So all they really needed was an org chart and a copy of the floor plan.
Yeah, I mean, there's been loads of really interesting studies that have shown that Conway's law seems to play out, right? I mean, Microsoft done a load of really interesting studies on their own internal structure and how they build and develop code. like one of the ones I really liked was they showed that if you look from a metrics point of view, one of the best determining factors about how likely a piece of code is to have bugs is how many people worked on that piece of code. So if you have a high churn of ownership on a piece of code, you tend to start seeing quality degrade because there's no real sense of ownership, right? And there's all kinds of, we see little bits and we see it everywhere. And I think that's why it's sort of this idea of, again, like we've got proof and truth at a very low level, lambda calculus, right? At the fundamental designs of chips. We don't really understand that stuff. We're operating up here where there's so much subjectivity and we're all time poor. And so whenever someone throws us something which seems like a truth that we can just say, yeah, that's it, we at least get to park that part of our brain because we just said, well, that's how things work.
It lets us change something from system 2 where it requires thought to system 1 where we could go really quickly. Now,
Yep.
Sam, you hinted at this earlier. If you want to change your software architecture, you need to change your organization. Maybe for the benefit of our listeners and viewers, can you explain what the Inverse Conway Maneuver actually is?
So this was kind of it was originally a throwaway comment made by Evan Botcher. So Evan was a colleague of mine at ThoughtWorks. We were both involved in the thing called the TAB, the Technical Advisory Board. And we were kind of office of the CTO, but one of our main jobs was putting out the ThoughtWorks radar. And so we've been talking about this idea that if you kind of want to change if you change the architecture without changing the organization, you'll get these challenges. And so Evan posited a theory that if you change the architecture, that could force the organization to change around it. And it's sort of an interesting idea. And the reason it resonated with me at the time, he mentioned it, and we put it on like the radar as like here's an interesting idea. Pretty sure it was an assess. Was, and I think it's flawed, by the way, the idea, but I saw it play out. I mean, I worked at a company called Auto Trader, still going well in the UK. And they started off as a print company, put out these like booklet things you put out there. And they basically, how that kind of, you saw that architecture sort of, well, basically someone had made an arbitrary decision about the architecture of this website application. I spoke to the people that were there around when it was designed. And they said, we have these different bits, then this comes in, then we'll have this thing in the middle, and then we'll have this thing. So we have like trade, I think it was core and consumer. And it was an arbitrary technical decision. But then the whole IT organization had grown up around that arbitrary architectural decision. This was the high level kind of enterprise architecture, if you will, but they certainly weren't an enterprise when I worked there. And so you had like these different kind of hierarchies within IT that looked after trade, core and consumer. And so that was a kind of concrete example of this. And so we'd seen it a couple of places. The thing was, that is more a reflection of what happened rather than something that you would actively use as part of organizational design. Right. Because I think what people misunderstand about the whole concept of the Inverse Conway Maneuver is it's not a tool I don't think you can use very effectively, because I think it completely disregards politicking. It completely disregards human resources and, compensation levels and human dynamics. Like, it's a nice idea for engineers. I understand computer. I have hard skills because they are hard. And if I code the right architecture, the organization will magically change around me. Bullshit. So that isn't really what happens. So I think it's more that you can see orgs grow up around architecture, but that's not the same thing as saying I would actively use that to change. If I didn't think the organization was right, or I didn't think the architecture was right, I wouldn't try and change one thing without the other. I would try and change both things together. And so I do think, again, a lot of the same people, I think, who talk about the Inverse Conway Maneuver, and I don't mention Evan amongst these, he's one of the smartest people I've ever worked with, don't really understand Conway's law anyway, or don't understand what it means or how to use it. They kind of know the words without understanding what it means.
Been reading a book, The Genius Myth by Helen Lewis, and in the opening chapter she talks about senius. I'm guessing it's an old Latin word, and the point is that we are each a reflection of our environment, the scene around us. And in my book, Visionaries and Rebels, I talk about Claude Shannon being the only bona fide genius in the book, actually, because everybody else worked in teams and they found themselves in amazing environments. But then I looked at Shannon again. He came of age in the time of the Telegraph. Vannevar Bush was his sponsor at his first postgrad study. He'd had a fantastic dual degree at the University of Michigan, and by chance he did a course in Boolean algebra. And I was like, holy shit, Claude Shannon is as much a function of his environment as he is whatever he was born with, whatever's in between his two ears. And I realised all Container Solutions have ever done, all I've ever done, is change the things in the environment for our customers, but we do it in the service of software development and team dynamics and happiness, because that's what leads to great software. We've never gone in there and said, we are going to reorganise you. The paradox being, or the irony, if that's even the right word, if we try to do that, people would go, jog on. Who do you think you are coming in here to change our business?
Yeah, and it's also like, I see, like, as much as there's great value in a lot of the team topology structures, for example, that's also become like, oh, we just do this. It's cargo. I mean, I don't like the kind of the analogy of the cargo cult concept, but it kind of does work, right? We're back in the Spotify model. It's not like we're actually spending any time to understand what this organization wants, what isn't working, what they want to work, how they want to work together, how that ties up with what the company's trying to achieve. It's like one size fits all model. Like, use team topologies, so you've got a big enablement team, you've got to do this. It's the same as all those organizations that adopted SAFe because they didn't actually want to change what they're doing, but wanted the illusion of change. And, they take your same crappy processes and put new words on it, and you carry on working as you were before, and you're surprised when nothing actually changes.
Well, it's so funny you should mention that. Now, I love Matthew and Manny. I think they've done a great book. The book is now in version 2. Surely some people have improved because of team topologies. But I've also heard that people are now saying, hey, you guys over there, you're now a stream-aligned team. And by the way, you're a sub-specific, whatever it's called. What's that one called? Specific domain team. I should know. Top of my head. What's it called again?
Oh, yeah. It's a specific subsystem team, but yeah.
Subsystem team. And you're that now. And then they sit back and they say, we've implemented team topologies. And guess what? Nothing happens.
I mean, there's kind of something that's got listed a little bit from their original work, right? Because that grew up out of the DevOps topologies, right? So they were looking at different ways that organizations had adopted the principles behind DevOps and how that had changed organizational structures. And the whole idea was that was a pattern book, effectively, of here's a load of different ways people adopted these ideas. Some of the ideas we think worked well and some ideas we didn't think went well. They've then distilled it down to a set of patterns that work together and have given us a methodology, right? This is a similar to the extreme programming book, right? Which was 11 software development practices that you package and do together as a unit. And I think that's useful because they all kind of reinforce and build on each other, these patterns that are in the Team Topologies book. But it also doesn't mean there aren't other things that might work, and it also doesn't necessarily mean that people that say they're doing it actually even understand what these things are. And so it has, to an extent, I think, almost narrowed the conversation about what kind of structures can actually work. I still think for a lot of my clients, these kind of teams kind of do. For larger corporates, they kind of make sense. But I think it narrows the conversation.
I always felt there was a sweet spot. When we looked at the XP book the first time around, pair programming, continuous delivery and all of that, the challenge was that any savvy teams would figure this stuff out for themselves. And I must say, I worked on such a savvy team. The teams that were too daft, it wouldn't matter how much guidance you gave them, they would never figure it out. So the book would work for a team that was a bit savvy, not completely daft, but not completely savvy, they'd not yet figured it out. But the problem is I think at the heart of all of this stuff is a desire to self-improve. And then if you don't have that, how do you ever begin doing XP or team topologies or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, what's the goal for you to change? Right? Why would you bother doing that? Right? I mean, I think the kind of interesting thing about something like extreme programming was it at least was something you could pretty much adopt within a single team. You didn't have to look for any larger change in the organization.
That's right. It was self-contained, wasn't it?
It was pretty much. And I think, and by design, I mean, that's why a lot of, that's what you saw the bifurcation into the world of Scrum and all that became versus the kind of more just what a team could deal with itself. I think the one thing I would say about extreme programming was the thing that was valuable to me is I worked out bits of it, but it helped me understand the other bits I was missing.
It helped you understand how it fitted.
Yes. And then it could also help you understand if I decided not to, for example, do pair programming, I'm understanding I'm missing something, I've got to replace with something else. So, but I think it was very much, you could just decide to do that and you could pick bits of it. You could start in different, and I remember doing like agile conferences back in like 2004, I think it was. I went to one of the XP conferences, talking to companies and people trying to do it. They say, we would just pick one of the practices and just try and make one of them work and see which one stuck. And, that's why lots of people end up doing continuous integration, because that was one of the easiest practices to get bedded in. But I spoke to somebody else who said, it took me 5 years to get anybody in my company to think that, see, I got pair programming done before I got CI in, because it just different organizations, different environments, some practices work and some don't. And yeah.
I remember those days. Now, switching gears, Sam, we've managed not to slag off the Team Topologies gang, Matthew and Manny, but if you like, you can slag my colleague and best mate Ian off. So Ian Mile, as you may be aware, although you might not have heard this yet because it's still a little bit under wraps, he's working on this follow the money methodology. And in it, he has defined Miles' law. I thought that was a bit egocentric, that, don't you think, Sam?
You can't do that. No, you can't do that. Somebody else has to say it's your law. So that's just not on. I'm going to give Ian a hard time when I see him next.
Let's give him what we should do is I should write that section and say, Jamie's starting, he can throw me under the bus.
This is what I would describe as, Ian's law. Go ahead.
Okay, here we go. So this is Miles' law. Organizations that design systems are constrained to produce systems that reflect the financial structures and incentives of those organizations. Boof. Initial.
Yeah, I think it's fine. I actually think if you look into the full Melvin's original pitch, like the statement I often use is communication structures. I don't say organization. If you read the full paper, though, there's a lot more in there. So I would imagine there are shades of that in Melvin's original pitch. A lot of this was detailed in an article that he pitched to Harvard Business Review, and Harvard Business Review rejected it outright. Said, no, it's rubbish. So there is stuff in there. So it doesn't. But again, I think, coming back to, and not trying to undermine Ian's work, but bringing it back to Conway's law, would you really have an organization that doesn't follow in any way or shape or form the financial structures of the organization? That would be a hard thing to imagine, wouldn't it?
Well, what he's trying to say, and this is where there's a link, so you're not trying to undermine his work, and I don't think he's trying to undermine your work or the Conway's law stuff. But what he says is software architecture is downstream of financial architecture. So he's not saying abandon it. He's saying if you want to change if changing your architecture requires changing your org, then changing your org requires changing your financial incentives. That's the chain of causation.
I mean, let's go to the heart of something like Team Topologies, right? So one of the biggest shifts that organizations struggle with adopting some of the ideas in Team Topologies comes back to that old chestnut of going from project-based planning to product-based operation, right? Project-based planning, what would you do? You had a pool of people. You'd go and make a business case, money. You'd pull that money together to get yourself a 3 or a 6 month bit of work. You'd pull those people together to work on something for 3 to 6 months, thinking about short-term horizons. The money would run out and you'd go through that cycle again. And so you were never thinking long-term about that project's mindset. In fact, I think the word project is the only word wrong that I would change in the Agile Manifesto. Change that word to product in the Agile Manifesto is perfect. So when I go to product thinking, oh, great, but all your financial structures now change. How do I maintain ongoing finance? It shifts things quite significantly. And so that is often an impediment. So I buy it. I absolutely buy it. And I think often when you are starting to hit challenges around these things, around trying to change things, you find like hidden things. I think it would play out to financial incentives as well, right? Individual financial incentives. So I worked on a company where we had helped modernize a bunch of old legacy apps. We combined them together into one big monolithic app, but it's a nice bit of code, well tested. we left to keep all the developers that we'd then helped grow. These all developers that wanted to learn new, and now knew had all these great new skills. To keep them, this company had to pay them more money. The only way they could pay them more money is to promote them. If they promoted them, they had to have direct reports. So they went from being a team of about 20 people to being 5 or 6 different teams. And now, of course, you've got the Conway's Law thing going on, which is you've got this single monolithic code base that worked really quite nicely. You've now got 6 teams. Guess what happened? They started breaking this thing apart, not actually for any operational reason, but purely and simply because of an organizational decision, which is pushed on them by financial incentives. So for me, it's all related.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the history of technology, I've been doing that from 1799 all the way back to 2026. Every single team that got this right, from Edison to the team at Netflix, understood that and didn't put artificial constraints on the one hand that would kill the product on the other. By the way, the other industry that gets this are TV makers and film studios. They understand how to get creative projects done on time. They don't use sprints, by the way. I'm pretty sure they don't do 2-week sprints. They deliver on time every time.
Yeah, so there's a different set of drivers there. I saw a great presentation last week. It wasn't filmed, unfortunately. It was on Wednesday at QCon. And it was a chap from the BBC talking about how their live broadcast goes out. And he's got a copy of the original BBC handbook, which I think was from 1928, so a year after the BBC launched. And they detail in one of these pages, it's a blank page, and they have a little dot, and they say, this is how much downtime we're basically allowed. So in 1928, for live broadcast, they were specifying that they basically had a 99.97% uptime requirement. And so that's endemic in the organization, right? So that shifts things. And so thinking back to your dumpster diving through history stuff, dumpster diving is unfair, right? But like, I would strongly recommend, if that talk unfortunately wasn't recorded, I think it becomes challenging. But if you can dig out a copy of the original 1928 handbook from the BBC, there's some great stuff in there.
All right, so with that in mind, Sam, we're coming to the end of this chat, this interview right now. With Miles' law in mind, and I'm going to see if I can find us a better name for that. With Miles' law in mind and Conway's law in mind, and all of your work into microservices, because you're working on a new book right now, is that correct?
Yes, yeah. I'm going a bit of a broader book, which is on looking at distributed systems in general and what we can do as engineers to make systems more resilient. So it's looking at the technical things that we can do, but also the behavioral things that we can do differently.
Okay, so with these 2 laws in mind and the new book coming up, what questions should architects be asking right now in 26 and, in the following year in 27?
How can I best use AI to really screw my system up? That's one question I'm thinking of. How can I still make sure I've got a job when my board's gone insane? I honestly, how as
you
an architect...
You say God insane, future tense. I think possibly they've already gone mad.
Oh, yeah. I think, I honestly, it's, if you think about uncertainty in the workforce, it's, do I have a job? Can I get a job? Uncertainty in the stock market, uncertainty in geopolitical areas. And as much as I like blaming Trump, there are other people to blame for what's going on, right? It's uncertainty. So how do you as an architect help guide your system in such uncertain times? And I actually think this continues a thing I know people have been talking about for a while, which is trying to move away from this idea of thinking about architecture as fixed and static, and instead understanding that we can and indeed should change our systems, but also what kind of patterns and practice do we need to architect for uncertainty? I've been spending a lot of time focusing on this for looking at things like using AI models, for example, to reduce security impacts and deal with vendors that might go out of business or jack up their token price. But how do I deal with uncertainty? Because uncertainty is the only certainty at the moment and probably will be for the next few years.
Final question related to Conway's law, but also to finance. If you're an architect or an engineer or a computer programmer, somebody who hasn't studied accounting, what is the one thing you need to know about money or business or the world that might get you through this uncertain period?
Oh,
It's a good question, right? Because the problem is we never think about money, not in the way the people in the finance department do. And I think it trips us up when it comes to building software and building decent and scalable architectures.
yeah. And I've realized I've explored that space myself just by going one step beyond. Cue the madness song, right?
I was about to say,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm not sure everyone listening at home will know the answer, but go listen to One Step Beyond by Madness, which is to say that I wouldn't say go and start reading The Economist, as much as I enjoy reading The Economist from time to time. But like, I would always just go, well, what's next? So like, this is my world. What's that next bit? So like, how much does this cost? Ask that question. Where does that money go? Where's that money come from? Would be a good answer. It's one of the reasons I love kind of working on the public cloud. There's also reasons I don't like working on it, but you get a lot of transparency, at least around your cloud spend. And I think that actually made me a better architect, right? Because I got to see the impacts of my stupid decisions like the next hour.
Lovely.
Yeah. So I would say just step a little bit outside, just follow a little bit, just go what's next. And then I think follow your own curiosity, but be curious, I guess.
It must have been 26 years ago. I read an article. I don't remember where. I wish I did. I can't find it anywhere online. And it said there's only going to be space for two sorts of people in the next 20 years. Business savvy technologists or techie savvy businessmen. And I remember thinking, oh, maybe I'd better learn about management and strategy and stuff. And it kind of stood me in pretty good stead as I developed bigger and bigger systems as I got, more responsibility.
Yep. I think Bill Gates said we only need about 6 computers, though, so not everyone gets it right. I mean, it's...
Well, I love Microsoft. Microsoft was saying the internet would never be a thing as late as 1998, and they were saying the cloud wasn't a thing as late as 2014.
I will say, though, just because if you are an architect or a tech lead thinking about what I do next, if you are someone that's thinking, oh, okay, I can't get a job, I'm a junior developer, whatever else, the stock advice I've been giving is we need more people who are really good QAs. So if you're a developer struggling to find work, learn some QA skills, because we need the ways of validating our software and those skills I think have died out a little bit in our industry. And I think the other way to go is to find ways to get more experience about sort of managing site reliability. It's difficult to do if you don't have a job, because you really need to do that on the job. But those are two places. If you're a developer and you can't find work, follow one of those two trends, because we're going to need those people more and more every year.
I think QA becomes a thing. If code as the bottleneck is solved, then all of a sudden acceptance testing might come back into play in a much bigger way. So I think that's fantastic advice. On that happy note, Sam, we're going to say thank you so much for joining us today. Good luck with the book, and good luck with the rest of 2026.
Awesome. Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks for watching Container Solutions TV. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe on YouTube and follow Container Solutions on LinkedIn for cut down parts and weekly clips. If you want help with platform engineering, cloud native transformation, or you need to follow the money in order to change how you operate your cloud at scale, then visit our website using the links below and get in touch. We'll see you in the next episode.